Let me introduce the guest we have today briefly. Dr. Mariaenrica GIANNUZZI. She holds a PhD in German studies from Cornell University. And now she's a postdoc researcher, Università di Torino, where she works on, I would say the main topic is atmosphere, the topic that she should be discussing today with us. But her research includes different other topics that from German literature to theoretical questions. And so she has a very, I would say, interdisciplinary attitude and mindset. And so without further ado, I'll pass the ball to Enrica, and we hope you enjoy our talk today.
Thank you very much. Okay, I really enjoyed the opportunity to discuss some ideas with you because of the expertise here in Nansan and people connected, and I'm very grateful also for your comment and questions. If you feel like asking questions or giving comments with generosity later, I'm ready to listen. The title of my talk today is Atmospheres, which is what we research in Turin, a spatial genealogy, meaning that, as many of you already know, space has a central role in defining the experience of perceiving atmospheres. And for this reason, I thought that see how space, the several concepts of space emerged in the debate on atmospheres can be really interesting also to understand which direction, several directions, phenomenology has taken so far and probably can take in the future. So also, as you might know, the word atmosphere has an obvious meaning, that is the envelope of gases surrounding the Earth or another planet. In particular, suspended aerosol create weather features such as clouds and haze. So this evidence has brought philosophy to conceive of the weather in the plural, namely as atmospheres, as objects of perceptual experience. The notion that I will propose to you is to redefine atmospheres in the plural as perceived variation of our situatedness. Situatedness is a central concept of new phenomenology, and is usually an operational concept to define our existential position regarding felt bodily states. I want to render this, let's say, existential notion more not obscure, but more opaque, introducing perception, introducing how we perceive space in a way that is not geometric and clear, but is rather influenced by sound, light, architecture, so lived spaces. And the kind of sources on which I base my work are, of course, Gernot Böhme, the essays Zur neuen Ästhetik, and then this small book by Hermann Schmitz, who, of course, is the founder of the atmospheric studies. This edition has been translated in Italian in the collection curated by Tonino Griffero and Die kurze Einführung in die neue Phänomenologie, in which atmospheres have actually a very light role. They the book is not heavy on atmospheres, but they describe rather the rhythm of the felt body, so the pulse, the breathing, expansion, and contraction as the main characteristics of this sort of internal rhythm. And then I introduce something that is not necessarily traditional in a reading on atmosphere, which is the queer phenomenology by Sarah Ahmed. For reasons that we will see in a second, on which I will return. The fourth element to define the felt bodily experience of space embedded in perceiving atmospheres is a cycle of lessons by Bernard Waldenfels in Turin. That is a sort of compendium of his phenomenology of the alien, namely a phenomenology on the body that is not considered necessarily healthy and neutral and without wounds, but rather it's a body that has pain. So he's in a sort of self-alienation with itself because it's inhabited by forces that are not necessarily known. So I will explain really shortly how Sarah Ahmed has approached the concept of atmospheres when she defines orientation. Orientation, for all the Kantian in the room, is a very important concept as it allows us to describe conceptually the transition from sensation to reason. And for Kant, this transition can be performed in terms of geography, of getting oriented, in the sense that reason works as landscaping and producing maps in which we can design our sensations in a reasonable way. So in her account of Kantian orientation, Sarah Ahmed insists a lot on the fact that orienting is also reorienting, and we don't necessarily know where is the orient, the east. That this notion of orientation depends on cultural politics that teach us where is the east and what is the west. So how does the discourse of orientation come into that of atmospheres? Well, she proposes an interface, which is the atmosphere. She describes the sensation as the here of bodily dwelling. So it's not body per se, but it's already being somewhere. A bodily dwelling is a place that is familiar, when I feel my body in a familiar way, when it's dwelling. Which means that it's not in danger, which means that it is not in a state of pain. No? So I can appreciate the here, bodily dwelling, but at the same time, this here, when I try to get oriented, means to reach out to other bodies. So every time that I focus on the here, immediately, I have in turn another focus, which is taking the body outside of itself, as it is affected and shaped by its surroundings. Quote, the skin that seems to contain the body is also where the atmosphere creates an impression. So the first boundary between the here and the surrounding is the skin. And the skin is a sort of organon to perceive atmospheres. So the atmosphere, as a first definition, can be understood as this interface, this tactile, haptic surface, boundary of the body that divides the here from the surrounding. At the same time, renders it possible. Just think of goosebumps, textures on the skin surface as body traces of the coldness of the air. So this skin is already impressed, is irritated, has reactions, physical reactions, there is a spontaneity, and it's in a constant relation with the weather, the elements. So according to this approach, even the I, which is connected to the here, and it's not the beginning of a sort of ontology, of an egocentric ontology. Even for Hamed, the here is more important than the I. And she describes this preeminence of space upon definition of egocentric space, or the I of the mind, as, quote, the attribution of feeling toward an object, which moves the subject away from the object, creating distance through the registering of proximity as a threat, in the case of, I feel afraid because you are fearsome. So you see, her notion of space is affective, in the sense that it's not immediately. The first thing is not, I am afraid of you because you're fearsome. It's not a dialectic between an I, which is the subject, and another person, which is an object that carries some properties. No, there is first an attribution, and this attribution moves away subject and object, at the same time creating distance and proximity. So in her phenomenology, what is fundamental is this self-attribution. And as I claim, self-attribution is a fundamental concept that emerges in Schmidt's and Böhme's phenomenology. So we can trace a continuity between her understanding of atmospheres and the more traditional new phenomenological tradition of thinking atmospheres spatially. Concepts that are important for Ahmed are also very important tools. For instance, in Böhme's phenomenology, which is the one of situatedness and Befindlichkeit, which is eminently spatial. And Waldenfels' theory is articulated around the inscription of a very ancient dichotomy between topos and spatium, which is actually a sort of, we can be thought as a contradiction or as a tension between two different understandings of space, in that this contradiction or tension is inscribed in the life. So we will see that there is another sort of a priori, if for Sarah Hamed, that was the gesture of attribution, of affective attribution. In this case of Waldenfels, the gesture of self-attribution would be spatial in the sense that there is a tension between topos as occupying a place, having a position, having a contour, as in the Aristotelian theory, and spatium, which is instead a whole different set of lived properties that do not happen on the geometrical space. And the fourth approach to space, to think atmosphere, is of course within a theory of the life, that of Hermann Schmitz of the proprioceptive islands, in which the I, the here, but also other, let's say, subjects, other substances inhabit in a way that is not rational the way in which we feel our body. So let me cross these different approaches and see if the definition that I gave at the beginning of atmospheres as perceived variation then it still stands up, or if we need some redefinition. So in 1995, Böhme did introduce something mainly metaphoric and volatile, like atmospheres, in the study of art reception. Retrospectively, he tried to distinguish the metaphor of an atmosphere, the vague emotion, which is in tune with the environment, or Stimmung. For instance, an unsettling storm is approaching, from the recursive weather-like conditions that allow for this vague emotion to occur unchanged. So we're dealing with a philosophical intervention in which what was a metaphor, then it really became a sort of, recursive, like the inquiry on recursive phenomena, in which something vague can have a non-vague occurrence. So in his words, a given Luftraum, an aerial space, becomes a cultural space, a Gefühlsraum, a space of feeling, or proprioceptive space, which coincides more or less with what I can touch, what I can see, with my sensorial boundaries. And it is in this transition from Luftraum to Gefühlsraum that certain emotions are more likely to occur than others. So, quote, it is a well-known phenomenon that a certain weather situation is often also experienced as a mood that is in the air. Weather conditions can mean both the current weather situation as well as, what is this? This is in our proprioceptive space. But is it the police or is it Krankenwagen? Anyway, weather conditions are also recursive. They're not necessarily catastrophic phenomenon. And the question of how weather is experienced by people who are exposed to it cannot be adequately characterized by trying to subjectivize objective weather data. Think of The Man Without Qualities, for instance, the way it starts, in which there's this attempt to describe what is a good day in terms of objective weather data, with a barometer and with altitude and with all possible physical characteristics that at the same time do not say anything about how we feel on a good day. So how do we feel on a good day? Well, for example, we can talk about the perceived temperature, but nonetheless, we need access to another experience that is not the one offered by temperature itself. So, example, when, for example, an approaching thunderstorm is experienced as threatening, a spring morning as cheerful, an hour of twilight as melancholy. In general, it can be said that weather phenomena are subjectively experienced as moods in the air, as atmospheres. So, and I think that this quote is the place in which the transition from weather to weather-like to atmospheres takes a first step in the direction of defining atmospheres as emotions, phenomena subjectively experienced, emotions that nonetheless are in the air, are there, are out. So they're not completely subjective either. And this is the important transition from a subjectivist understanding of atmospheres and as shared emotions, shareable to some extent. So, the second transition from a weather-like phenomenon to perception of spatial semantics is given by Böhme's account of situatedness. So what is the atmosphere? Is what we sense. when we sense our situatedness. So it's an approach to situation, to be situated, to be limited, to be culturally present, to be bodily present, in a way that is not rational. And it's not the Kantian orientation, it's something more perceivable. It's not knowing where you are geographically, but it's called sensing the where, in a way that probably has to do with skin and has to do with what Böhme defines as sensing our presence, the space in which we are present. So it's a peculiar epiphany of presence. It's a technique of presence. And this is going to be more important than the kind of intellectual approach to space in defining atmospheres. So, quote, there is a specific sense of being in called disposition, which is a horrible translation of Befindlichkeit, which is that situatedness. In our situatedness, we sense where we are. Sensing our own presence is simultaneously to sense the space in which we are present. Where we are, where we find ourselves, can still be interpreted topologically as a positioning in space. And indeed, in sensing our bodily presence, both the distances to things, or better put, their oppressive closeness, or their receding expanse, and the geometry of space come into play. However, here too, the process is better understood in the sense of movement impressions, like aspiring or weighting down. But sensing the where is actually at the same time more integrative and specific, as it refers to the character of the space in which one is. We sense what kind of space surrounds us. We sense its atmosphere. So there is an apprehension of kind, which is still very general, but I don't think it can be defined holistic, as many do. Of course, it has to do with presence and it's in generality. But it seems that this notion of kind reveals a sort of catalog of possible atmospheres, of possible manifestations. So a series more than a globality. So my definition was that atmospheres are perceived variation of our situatedness. And I find really important that there is a third transition from weather to weather-like to emotional tonality and presence to, and we are getting there, the power of architecture in shaping the sense of presence. Quote, while spaces marked by location and distance are essentially determined by things, the space of bodily presence is initially nothing more than a perceptible indeterminate expanse, out of which diverse spaces can emerge through articulation. Orientations, plural, I love this plural. Orientations, movement, impressions, and markings are such forms of articulation. They create spatial concentrations, directions, and constellations. So you see, this is not a geometric space in a sense that is transparent and unmarked and static and empty. It's a field of forces. It's really dynamic. It's already marked in ways that pertain to language. I don't think it's it's a chance that Böhme speaks of articulation. So it's a dense space, it's a marked space. Bodily presence is not a moment of, let's say, unio mystica, but it's more understanding all the different articulations and obscurities of where we are. Important consequences for architecture or the theory of architecture, and the references of Böhme are obviously Zumthor as an architect, or James Turrell as a constructor of installations and ambiances, is that architecture is not anymore based on visuality, on geometric lines and surfaces, but rather it's a form of again intention of topos and spatium, no? Does not create buildings and constructions as such, but for people, so for the living body of people. And it also becomes easy to accept non-classic forms, non-objective means of constituting space, and these are primarily light and sound. This is a small revolution, because when you think that the process of designing the building is usually based on mapping, on representation, on abstracting objective data in a way that they are referential to the real space, saying that design is based on light and sound can actually raise a new form of experiencing space, built environments, in which, for instance, the primum is how the light works. So openings and closures, contractions and expansions, forms of creating distance and creating proximity or familiarity, collectors of our lived body that are also places in which we can rest and we can appreciate a non-functional idea of spaces. These are examples from Turrell. This is another ambiance which is very famous. You've probably seen Drake's videos. And disorientation in this space is fundamental, more than getting oriented and know where the east is or where the sun comes up. So it's an idea of space that movement is not necessarily tending toward the goal of an action, the aim of an action, like a target, but is suspending action, is suspending this readiness, because our senses are reorganized in a different hierarchy. So here also you find a different understanding of the positions between domestic and domestic space and garden, and forms in which the surrounding, playing with surrounding and center. Okay, so I will also trace this distinction of topos and spatium in Waldenfels' lectures. As topos was, again, the shape of a body, what takes up space, and spatium was, for Waldenfels, oriented space. But oriented not in the Kantian sense of knowing where the east is, but rather asking where, here. So asking and answering here in the sense of perceiving the here, of a self-definition of the subject, which, as I claim, is very close to what, to that gesture of self-attribution of Hamed. And this is the proprioceptive space, and the here. What is the proprioceptive space? It's not necessarily where I can reach out, no? For instance, in neurosthetics, the proprioceptive space is where I can interact in a give and take form with a joystick, for instance, what I can manipulate, a sort of closed space in which I have an agential power, and I can interact, I can receive feedback from the network of things that are performing together with me. In this neo-phenomenological theory, the question is a bit different, because the proprioceptive space is not defined by action, but is defined by a question about the where and the here, what I visualize, but also the visualize it not necessarily in visual terms, also what I hear, what I sense. That's the proprioceptive space, and it's different from person to person, but it's also interpersonal constructed. And at the same time, it has to do with a self-definition, with a self-position of the subject. It's not that the I exists before this self-definition, this spatial gesture of self-definition. According to Waldenfels, this where here a self-definition of the subject is also a self-attribution of directions of movement. In this here, there are several characteristics already. It's not an empty here, but there is directions of movements, a distinction of up and down, and a sense of falling, forward and backward, left and right, distance and proximity, inside and outside, and disposition. Why? Because the human body is made in a certain way. Knowing, feeling, sensing that we are built and we behave as buildings that have these characteristics already is essential in the perception of atmospheres. Now, we can criticize this idea, and it has been easy for some people to say this is an ableist understanding of the body. Not everybody has all this set of properties. The lib, so defined, let's say, assumes a very expert user of the lived body. How can techniques of the body change the perception of inside and outside, for instance, or distance and proximity? The lived body is not neutral. But maybe this is a grid that we can use to detect these differences. And when we debate perception of an atmosphere, maybe we can use these more than as properties of the subject, rather as indicators of perceived variations. If we compare Waldenfels' account with Hermann Schmidt's, we would find that Waldenfels is more geometric than Schmidt's, when Schmidt defines perception as proprioceptive islands. Again, he defines self-ascription as being conscious of a situation, of a felt bodily state. And this is, let's say, this minimal understanding of subjectivity is not a subject that comes there with all the reason and the agential properties, and no, it's gesture, aesthetic gestures. And as you can see, is more than I. The felt bodily state is here, is now. Are questions on what is here, what is now, what is being, what is this, and what is I. So it's a very complex entanglement and rigidly joined experience. And when we really want to get oriented, all these 5 things, they do reconfigure themselves in a way that we don't have a priori features for identification of something. It's a very dynamic entanglement. And this is consequences even on what we call time. I found very interesting the idea that in the felt bodily experience, we're always in a modal time. We don't have the past, the present, and the future organized in line, but we have a practical concern and apprehension of states of things, as for the past programs, sort of teleological orientation, and problems. So it's a different configuration, constellation of states, no? And these states, if we really want to try something underlying, is a primitive present tense, no? It's this affective involvement before identification. As we saw before, the space is never that storm, but that storm is already has an affective tonality. And on this level of perception, that's the way in which it emerges phenomenologically. So this is really important because you can start phenomenology in a completely different way. You can start from the famous grain of salt and which properties does it have, as in Hegel, or you can start with the color red, as in Kant. So it's not that positing the affective involvement as a primum is harmless. It means a completely different phenomenology of space. And for many, this is what Tonino Griffero has attempted to do, no? In the atmosferologia, aesthetics of emotional spaces, in which landscapes are reorganized, redescribed, restituted phenomenologically through this very complex articulation of Hermann Schmidt's 5 elements of subjectivity, self-ascription, tonalities, and how all these conditions do influence the perception of landscapes. And that's when landscapes become atmospheric spaces. So can we still talk of landscapes? I don't know, because landscape assumes that there is a point where you have to stand. Is it a good concept to define space or to experience space? It's static. Some people, for instance, I'm thinking of Michel Jacob have said that cinema is completely challenged the idea that landscapes are static because we experience them in trains, for instance, or in cars, and or through the cinematic eye more than in-person panoramas or picturesque landscape aesthetics. So another way to understand landscapes, let's say spatial affects that can emerge in what traditionally was called landscapes, are shared emotions. This is the approach that some in analytic philosophy has introduced in the study of atmosphere, departing really from Schmitz and the fact that he was placing emotions in public space. So not something locked in the inner space of the individual. I don't feel emotion in my heart, in my stomach. There is a form of probably demonic sense of atmosphere that I think Griffero explores really well, in which there is a kind of external possession. Like, I'm generalizing or using proper terms, but how can we think of emotions that are out there? I'd like to discuss that with you, no? Because as a Western person, to me, the spirit is always in the heart or in the mind, but it's like here, the center of my proprioceptive space. What does it mean if emotions are not the center, the eye, but really something peripheral? For instance, Pallasmaa has defined this as peripheral, no? A form of peripheral perception, without ending up in the paranormal. in the perception of phenomena we cannot see, which is also a possibility. We don't see magnetic fields, for instance. There is a lot to unpack. Anyway, so it's up in the air. It's not internal. It's pre-personal. It's a pre-personal form of affectivity. And these are Lucy Osler and Thomas Santo that are trying to define how atmospheres are not intercorporeal, intersubjective, but according to them, they are interpersonal. Namely, they are elicited by the environment that can impact, shape, and drive the emergence of what they call expressive behavior and interaction in a number of ways, and thus they play an important role in shaping the emergence of particular interpersonal atmospheres. In their articulation of interpersonality, they do lead a complex critique of Thomas Fuchs' idea of intersubjectivity, also of half objectivity, meaning, for instance, other philosophers of mind that have studied schizophrenia. So they claim that, but now we don't have the time to dive into this. What I'm interested in is that external also means collective. Once the emotions are not rooted in the I, but are rooted in some external conception, conditions that we can perceive maybe through the skin, or maybe through some sort of impersonal apprehension. At that point, we are forced to reconceive even the interpersonal space, the way in which we deal with each other, in a way that goes toward collectivity rather than individuality. For the examples they do, if people in a cafe crowded with furniture, their behavior will be restricted to some extent by the environment. So the occupants could not, for instance, use sweeping gestures or dance a tango in this space. There is then an obvious practical sense in which environmental factors shape the expressive behaviors of those present and thus impact what tone of atmosphere might arise. This is a crowded cafe, right? Instead, if we are, let's say, in a high-ceiled room, and voices can be magnified, enhancing the sense of busy chatter that we might perceive as a bustling, dynamic atmosphere, then our interaction also morphs the field of expressivity in which certain environments can impact our experience of atmospheres. And then there is also a more intriguing and robust sense, they say, in which the material environment can influence the emergence of an atmosphere in which this is not perceived as neutral, but as permeated with certain affordances, solicitations for particular actions, or affective possibilities. By affording various actions, so it's when the space has a specific request, is a demand, has an affordance. Affording various action, social and affective possibilities, the environment can solicit and drive particular forms of interaction. And think of like a place that is dark and in which there is a romantic atmosphere. Maybe you are in a garden, it smells like cherry blossoms. Maybe that space affords giving kisses or hugs or being intimate with someone. This is my last couple of slides, because for Osler and Santos, this is extremely important in the political context, in which having control of a space can empower one to influence the emergence of certain atmospheres, which in turn encourages, drives, or sustains the emergence of political emotions. or underpin one's ability to enter into certain atmospheres and enact change. So for them, atmospheres are the door to what they call political emotions. Let's say hate, love, trust, fear. Most of them are negative, and there is a big debate on which kind of emotions are political. But most of the literature converges toward these like 4 types. So atmospheres favor or hinder the manifestation, the expression of behaviors that are moved or oriented by political emotions. In that sense, atmosphere also render the normativity of the space. They influence not only the body as a neutral, even marked, lived experience, but also they render sometimes perceivable what is normal from what is not normal, what is allowed, what is not allowed, in that they become political emotions, or they could become political emotions. So this is the, let's say, counter definition that I wanted to give, because if in the first instance I describe atmospheres as the perceived variation of our situatedness, if we go through the debate on the spatiality of atmosphere, situatedness more and more becomes also the perception of a body norm, and the kind of markings that the lived body has inscribed in it, and the way in which space is engineered can also be constitutive of certain actions that we can or cannot perform. Thank you. For your attention.
So thank you very much. And so let's start discussion or question. People on Zoom, please, if you have a question, just switch your microphone on and you can enter freely without raising your hands or something like that. So
if there's no comment from the people online, can I?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much for
I'm really interested.
I really enjoyed. I mean, I have to go back to Tokyo, so I don't really have a lot of time, but I would love to discuss with you more. But so Sarah Ahmed, when I was listening to your Sarah Ahmed's discussion, it reminded me of Watsuji Tetsudo. I mean, if you know him, so he is the first professor who became an ethics teacher, ethics professor at University of Tokyo, and so he has been writing about. I mean, he was basically using Heidegger at that time because Heidegger was talking about the notion of time more. But then he was critical about Heidegger, and he said that the spatial notion is completely locked in Heidegger's discussion. So that's why he wrote the Climate, Kudo.
Can I ask you again the name of this philosopher?
Watsuji Tetsudo. The translation is very poor, and I'm hoping that maybe perhaps in the future I could do the retranslation of it, or maybe there would be someone who.
but the Italian translation is very good.
Oh, okay.
It's the the translator is now.
Okay, well, that's amazing, but English translation is very poor. So he was in the first chapter, he's talking about the coldness. And I mean, you also mentioned in your, during this first section, you mentioned about the coldness. And Watsuji was also talking about this coldness and how the mother dresses up her child. when she feels coldness. And so, you know, what she was basically talking about, this phenomenological interaction. You feel it on your skin and your body, but then you ultimately, you know, think that the others are also feeling the same way, the coldness, right? So, I mean, this discussion has been there in Japan also, and this was written in 1960s, by the way. So I was wondering, I mean, oh, okay, Sarah Ahmed might not be aware of Watsuji's discussion because Watsuji's research has been pretty much introduced in French by French philosophers.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, so there is a whole discussion of not being egocentric, but you know, there's no boundary if we're going to talk about spatial, atmospheric things. And that is also already there in Japanese philosophy, I think. And for that, I'm trying to talk about interrelationality. How are we going to relate each other? How are we going to, you know, share the emotion of the space that we are, you know, I mean, sharing in a lived space. And so I was really interested in Böhme, the second one. I'm also Böhme's emotions of the atmosphere. Omori Shozo are one of the principles that I'm working on. He's talking about this emotions of the atmosphere. When you are watching the opera, you are sharing the emotion with the opera singer and the people surrounding you watching the opera, right? So, well, maybe this also happens with the cinema. But the cinema is the problem. The cinema is that there's no one on the stage. So Omori Shozo was talking about this relationality between the people on the stage who is citing all these emotional things and convening the emotions to the audience and the audience sharing the emotions. You know, there's an interaction in the space. And he was also saying that even the opera house is empty, you can still feel this, you know, emotional things with this remembering the memories of what was happening there, right? So he was also talking about, I mean, this one, I think Böhme is also talking about now and here. But then Omori expanded his discussion. I was talking that, you know, maybe, oh, not talking, but I was writing that maybe it could be expanded in the past, what had happened in the past. You know, if you're in an opera house, you had this wonderful experience overnight, and then you come back the next day or the week after in an empty space, in an empty opera house, but you still feel this, you know, emotional thing coming back to you with your memory. And he thinks that there's certain space that makes you feel the atmosphere again. Yeah. So I'm talking about the historicity of this atmospheric corroboration, or how should we say? The constellation is also true, but yeah, I mean, but constellation in that sense, there's no, I mean, it's also self-centered experience, right? So maybe more it's more egocentric, perhaps, but yeah, I'm interested in what your take about this historicity of the shared emotions in the atmosphere. And for the third one, Waldenfels, Yuxkol, I mean, you know this, right? The Umwelt. So the body, the built body, as you said, is the definition of the sensed environment, right? So if we are not humans, we're going to change ourselves into a fly or a spider, or I would like to imagine myself turning into a squirrel because I love eating nuts. But you know, I mean, we might sense something totally different even if we are in the same environment, right? And so, I mean, from that sense, I'm trying to think about environmental ethics in a way, how to, you know, share the shared space with non-human beings, non-human living beings. And so that's just how the Watsuji scholars in France is taking through this shared experience on how they can, expand it to environmental ethics and so forth. Well, also, of course, you mentioned about the affordance, which is also, UNESCO started this affordance, right? Yeah. But I really enjoyed, so these are my 3 or 4 comments that I gave you, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, I really enjoyed it. But and my last question is, so your definition of atmosphere is perceived valuation of a body known, right? So what are you going to do from here? What is your key questions to this?
Right. Because situatedness is a concept, let's say, that is more plastic than norm. With norm, we're going toward legality and institution and shame. Political emotions that are exactly, I don't know why, but they're mostly fear, shame. Instead, situatedness tells something more, let's say, personal or something more fantastic, more future-oriented, because it grounds you in the process, in the acts of becoming, more than sort of imposed normality. So I don't know, I want to think about it more. I think it's useful to, for instance, I've mostly thought of art in terms of a place. It's like something you see in a church, in a museum. Instead, there might be new ways of normativity, let's say atmospheric normativity, that instead of putting like the genius and the author at the center of experience, they put at the center of experience public spaces, for instance, parks, and the way we can interact in places that have a different norm. So a norm in the sense of normality, of everyday,
Right.
of everyday aesthetics, quotidian interaction, something in which people can share common space and hence also share emotion, even with non-human beings. Let's say alternative forms of nature. There are not
Right.
not just.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
That's what I'm interested in, really, like gardens and parks, how what kind of common perception they can organize instead of the museum. For instance.
So, that's interesting. But I was also thinking about the church. Have you been to Nanzan Church here?
Not yet.
Okay, so because it's beautiful. When you go inside, it's Catholic church, but it's so different from the European old Catholic church. It's like half circle, and it's, of course, the center stage is there, but then you can see all the lights coming in, from backwards. And it's a beautiful experience to be in the church. It's not like in all old Italian or French Catholic church that you feel kind of suppression. It's more like, a gathered community because it's half circle and people are forced to sit in a half circle.
Yeah.
Centering the stage. So I was wondering, these kind of, architecture also gives you the certain perception of how we are and why we are gathering in a space, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you go to the old churches, old Catholic churches in Europe, it's always like you have the nameplates of the important persons in the front seats, and there are reserved seats, and if you're a father, you have to sit behind, way behind, and waiting for the second priest to come to and give you the bread, right? So all these hierarchical thing, the norm of the hierarchy is there in the church also. And I was also thinking about that through your because you also mentioned about the architecture a little bit, right?
Yeah.
During Rome, yeah. the fundamental of the topos as spatial, yeah. Yeah, you also mentioned the primary thing is light and sound from the bones, and experience of space is important. And you added the suspension of the readiness. But this suspension of readiness, I mean, when we're talking about that, I was really thinking about the Church of London, because the suspension of readiness is more open. Like what I felt. I mean, I would love to know what you're going to feel when you go there. Could you give me, sorry, can I keep on talking?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if people from home can hear.
Yes,
I think so, right? Good.
Good. I'm going back to historicity. I mean, what do you think about the historicity?
The like if atmospheres leave traces, or if
Right,
there is
right.
a remembrance.
So,
You
so,
said
so.
you use this word.
Yeah.
It's very important. I mean, since atmospheres have always been treated as a very vague phenomenon, ephemeral, the way in which they could sediment or they could be perceivable in states of the body that are not felt bodily states, right? So the presence, how can the presence, the sensing the word, be extended to include something that is not present, not anymore. Thinking of dead people, for instance, no? But this is, and when, yeah.
For example, in Japan, if you're practicing some kind of, let's say, arts, for example, you go in a place called a dojo, and dojo means the place, jo, of the way, the Buddhist way you are practicing. And when you enter in the dojo, even if the dojo is empty because no one is there, you, I can say, bow, because even if in this moment no one is there, the fact that this place is a dojo means that several generations of other people practice there. Therefore, this place is not simply a geometrical place, but is a dojo. So when you enter, the atmosphere reconduct you automatically to an absent past that is absent but present. And then, for example, the ground, the soil of some dojos, for example, in Kyoto, they are made by wood. And because they use the same wood, you walk without shoes, with barefoot. And because the people use this dojo from decades, the soil is used, is no more perfectly plain. And then when you walk inside this dojo with your feet, you feel the past that is present in the soil, that is consumed. So in this sense, the past is always present. For example, think to in his absence. For example, no theater. There is a place, so Professor Sato spoke about opera house, but also a no theater is the same. And in Zeami's no theater, this place allows to ghosts to come back and to tell their story, because the main plots of the no theater is a ghost that comes from another place, the world of death, for example, and comes in our present, tells his stories, and then go back and disappears. So this recurrence of the past, of a dead past, of a lost past in the present, is made possible because we have a stage, because there is a butai.
That's wonderful.
I have another question. So presupposition, I don't know anything about atmosphere, so probably it's a very stupid question, but I noticed that when you quoted Böhme, Böhme used we. We are experiencing.
Right.
But for example, maybe, I don't know, other authors say I. So my question is, the life, is our life or is my life, or who is the owner of the life in these authors? Because probably Professor Sato, when she mentioned Watsuji, the coldness, for example, in Japanese, when you say samui, is not clear if I feel cold or the other people feel cold, or simply the atmosphere is cold because there is no subject. So my question is, why Böhme uses we instead of I? And who is the owner of the life perceiving atmospheres in these authors?
Yeah. No, I really like what your comment on preserving a space for the past to manifest, even if it's empty, as in the case of the no theater. Let's say, to prepare a sort of a door, so the past can manifest, to keep it open. Regarding instead, who is the owner of the body, I think that most of that all authors have a different perspective on this. For instance, in Ahmed, the gesture is more important than the I, the pronouns or ownership. She has a very political vision of how the bodies exist. So there's this body, which is more complex than the I. So the I would be a generalization that really doesn't keep up with the complexity of the body. But at the same time, the body is already political, so it's already defined by norms. So in that case, the gesture of attribution, how relations do define proximity and distance between the subject and the object, the relations are really important. And I would say those have ownership. Böhme uses the second person plural, the first person plural over and over. And that gives a sense of communality. When I read it, I have the impression that he's going to visit a theater, for instance, with others. No? It's sort of like including others in basic experience, in very simple forms that everybody can really understand and repeat. The places that he visits are never like secret collections, or they're like public spaces, they're there. I think he has really a specific care for this generality of what everybody can experience, common sense. On the other, in Schmitz, it can be more complicated than that. Because it does describe the I, let's say, the subject as dispersed through islands of perception. And the affectivity is very diffuse. There are peaks of intensity somewhere, but at the same time, it's really never inside me. So there is the idea of ownership is questioned. I don't know if there is an owner, like I don't know what are the boundaries of these like alien forms of perceiving. So the I is together with other things that are not pronouns, like here and now and being, you know. It's a very complex and the original theory of the life. It is problematic in terms of ownership, because if we dispossess the life of a center, of an egocentric space, then it's easy that I can hurt you and say that it's not you that is hurt. It's not you that are feeling pain, you know? Like it's also dispossessing people from the experience of having pain. And I'm a bit afraid of this. Like I think there must be an identity somehow, even if it's transient and performative, in terms that a sort of insurgence from all these dispersed proprioceptive islands, there must be a moment in which together, a unity that can be trusted, that can talk and speak for oneself. But people have different views, and I'm sure we should speak with somebody that knows Schmitz more than I do, because my knowledge is really limited about him. So I'm not really entitled, or this is really an opinion. It's not an information. As for analytic philosophy, the egocentric space is really important. Proprioception as defined by the neuroscience is very important. So there is a sense of the I, which is the subject, intentionality, attention, and so the body ownership is individual, for sure. So there is a spectrum. And of course, if we have to gain a theory of atmospheres, what I did was a montage to some extent, but at some point one has to submit to a theory of life. Yeah, it's important.
It's important is for me, because we are in Japan today, so I don't know if my approach is too much or is exaggerated somehow, but for example, no wonder for me that for analytical philosopher the I is very important. Must be so, also because probably this analytical philosopher you are referring to, they are thinking in English. Mm-hmm. So it's very simple. So the concept of I, as we use it in Italian, for example, or in English or in German, the concept of we, the structure of a sentence, I feel cold, for example. Seen from my poor knowledge of Japanese, is simply because you are thinking and speaking in another kind of language. And therefore, when I was listening to you, I thought, okay, they are great authors. I like Böhme very much, and it works in German, works in English perfectly, or in Italian. But what if I try to rethink these things in Japanese? For example, Schmidt said, here, now, being, is, I. So being, for me, is a big problem if I think in Japanese. What is being? And what is I? Is I the same of the several pronouns that you can use in Japanese to say something similar to our I, according to the situation in which you are, the gender that you identify yourself, and so on. So I is the same I as Japanese people normally use. What is being in Japanese? Maybe these here now can we find something that works, but so I wonder if it is if we should take much more care of which language are we using when we make philosophy.
Yes. How many versions of personal pronouns can we find that are not personal pronouns, but a different system? Yeah, this is.
So therefore, for me, the experience of life is very interesting because we could somehow maybe try to consider it as something that is really common to all human beings, because we have a body, independently of which language we use to describe what our body can do or how can we interact. So I wonder if for this kind of phenomenology, there is a level let's say, non-linguistic or pre-linguistic that is.
I think there's a question before.
Yes, there is Lorenzo who has
Okay,
raised,
okay.
his hands.
Excellent.
Lorenzo Marianucci.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for the background noise. So, no, I mean, there's so many things. It was a very, very interesting and very complete, like not even introduction. I mean, like a very good anthology of different positions that shows how vital the atmosphere as an ocean, and I mean, like still in definition is. As somebody has been working a bit with Watsuji and a bit with Schmitz, maybe I can add something about like these operant stress on the first person. So of course, I mean, Böhme, yes, like it tends to go on the we, but Schmitz has an idea of like not, like he's not like a traditional, obviously, he's not a traditional phenomenologist, like he's rejecting these like ecological position, and he's using the notion of vital drive as a pre-personal, like, so like these ongoing dynamic process that of course grounds the self. I mean, this like first personal situation is connected to my own feeling here, feeling like that something is happening just to myself here and now. He's introducing the idea of subjective facts. So like there are some statements that can only be done in first person, including the idea, for instance, I'm in pain. So I can like saying I'm in pain and Lorenzo Marianucci is in pain is very different, because like the ethical implication of I'm in pain is much different than a third person. So like he's, I would say, safeguarding to a point this like uniqueness of like it's not even an ecological position, but it's in a sense like it's a communicative thing. Like the other key notion that I think it's important to, it might be a bit of a missing piece of the puzzle, that like he's stressing so much the idea of like felt bodily communication. So like what's so important for Schmitz is not only the fact that the body is there, that the body is like a starting point of phenomenology, but that life are like immersed in like different forms of communication. So they don't just end with the skin, but like they are communicating with living and non-living objects. And their grammar, the dynamics, like the vital drive is not an absolute. Like in this sense, it's very far from Levin's philosophy, but like he's like engaging in an ongoing communication with other bodies and like with the atmospheric phenomena or shapes can be shapes, it can be all kind of like kinetic suggestions, synesthesias in the environment. And that's for me, like as I was translating him, there was something that there was not, like there was like a piece of this philosophy that I was introduced as I was translating, and that I found really important, because it's also it's a way of like not being outside of a like ecological position, but at the same time like keeping this sense of like my selfhood is constituted through acts of communication. And that's a very like practical acts of communication, that they are, of course, not static, they're not permanent, but they are like spatial meaning as well. And this is how also he's understanding situations as something thoroughly interconnected to atmospheres. And from this idea of like leibliche Kommunikation, like felt bodily communication, I think it's a very interesting bridge towards another author who's like getting very, very close to atmospheres as Watsuji. So when Watsuji is talking about Ningen, I mean, he's like interhumanity, like a human as something like individual, and at the same time as common. He's basically like addressing that as a form of communication, like as a form of like being together is a form of like, is a communicative act. And that, of course, that like includes language, clearly includes language, clearly includes like concepts as diffuse phenomena, like how the language is like, belongs to an environment, but like arises from situations, but also like it's thoroughly like, bodily, like it's a sort of bodily environment. So that's they are there. I mean, like there is some everybody's formulating in a different way, but like everybody, I would say everybody has a very has some attention. And one last thing that came to my mind is like Fongaro, Professor Fongaro was discussing, yeah, maybe European languages, like this kind of ecological preeminence in European languages. Ogawa, like Schmitz himself, I mean, they have a Amman, like one of the students from Husserl was writing about like Stimmdeutschen Impersonale on impersonal voices in the German language already in 1926. Like he was noticing how atmospheric phenomena tend in European languages, not in Japanese, curiously, tend to have like this S. And of course, the S is a Freudian category, so even older. So I would really we can say that as a generalization. And yeah, my headphones died. But they are very much in European languages as well. We have like all sort of like impersonal or pre-personal forms of language. Like it's in Nietzsche, it's in Baudelaire, like the sense of positioning. It's very present in poetry and even early phenomenology. We're not talking about new phenomenologies. It's already mid-20s, and it was like very, very thoroughly articulated how like pre-personal forms of expression can be important to understand what happens to the body and to the environment. Thank you.
Yeah, in French you have also il y a, no? It's in personal form.
If I can add just on to that, if there is enough time, otherwise.
Oh, there is a lot of time, as you please.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it connects to both what Lorenzo and Professor Fongaro said regarding language and also the difference maybe between the Japanese language and Japanese tradition and the European one. I noticed in your I was really struck by your interest in space, or rather that is also in the title, the genealogies of space, different genealogies of space, but also then you introduced the tension between place and space. And I've actually been thinking for a while that that of place could be a different genealogy of atmosphere, more than space. And of course, it goes back to Heidegger's critique of Descartes' conception of geometrical space, which I think spatiality, which I think was a bit was underlying many of your arguments, because it's underlying many of the neo-phenomenological arguments. But at the same time, so I think that, however, there was a bit of a lack of theorization of place in your talk, or rather, it was more. You were focusing on so many other things, and it was coming just from Waldenfels. But at the same time, I think that it connects to what Professor Fongaro and Professor Lorenzo were saying, in the sense that I felt that the difference, for example, the difference in the Japanese language was also kind of theorized by Nishida in his essay on Basho and the essay on place. This idea that the self is a place in the sense of something before the difference between subject and object, something consciousness is before this difference. But at the same time, I'm also wondering whether in the European tradition itself, in continental philosophy, there has been an attempt at thinking a place before the conception of judgment, and before the conception of language that is characteristic of European languages, namely, I'm thinking of the concept of decora, which Nishida, among other things, also cites, and I'm thinking of decora in Derrida, Caballero, Agamben, and how they've been trying to rethink the place of things in language through this concept. It comes from the place of from the neuter, I think, il neutro, neuter from Blanchot and that kind of tradition. But there is a whole critique of language that I think was trying to reach at a different concept of place, and that's how I see all of these reactions to your talk connected in a way, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and so I wonder also if you have any ideas and any different directions or thoughts. Thank you so much. Also, it was a outstanding talk and very useful.
Thank you, Alberto. No, it's a very good question. I love the question. I mean, I intentionally left place out of the picture on purpose because it's an entire new world of atmospheric studies. Let's say that is less a debate in philosophy and more a debate in cultural analysis, including language. And this might be a very good index, a good trace, a pathway to follow. You were quoting Blanchot, but maybe in Cristeva there is also an idea of like the place of language. As words do not come from the dictionary, they do come from the living body and like experiences in which we learn them. Analytic philosophy has a similar concept to express this, which is attunement. The idea that concepts are learned through other people, but also through cultural practices. So we learn concepts as we learn to play instruments, attuning oneself with the world. Marta Benenti has done some work on this, and she's really good. Now, coming back to place, there is, for instance, Luca Bandirali in Lecce, who has written this book, Medium Loci, which deals with atmospheres as a result of specific cultural productions. For instance, photo shootings before shooting movies. La fotografia di scena, come si dice in inglese? Stage photography. Stage photography. And for him, that's the place in which an atmosphere becomes evolving, and then it can be incorporated in the movie. But the movie doesn't really translate the atmosphere because it's another mediation and is more technologically complex. The movie translates instead other spatial attitudes. And there is a whole research on anthropology about spatial attitudes. For instance, topophilia, topophrenia, topophobia, all kinds of, let's say, bodily movements that bring us closer or away from space, from place, you know, because place has a very distinct affective tonality. It's not neutral, right? It's something, exactly, it's not space as we are trying to abstract space from place. But if we were not to do this abstraction, then our bodily affective relation with where I am should be fundamental, and that's totally place. So the kind of spatial attitude, meaning, I mean, anthropologists would also say the kind of actions that I do there and the practices, the social practices. There is also like place, space, and environment by Doreen Massey, which is a fundamental book. Sociology of space has worked on place more than philosophy, I would say. What else? I mean, there is Matteo Meschiari on narratives of places. He's so good. He's recently written Landness, just this terrestrial quality that like the affect of feeling the earth. But Matteo Meschiali, for instance, he's one of the so-called narrative turn in anthropology, in which place is really important because that's what, you know, the social sciences are supposed to do instead of measuring people's habits. So there is a whole interest in place. Yes, in the social sciences. Also, places versus landscape. It's another approach. It's complex. I mean, I haven't read so far, let's say, a philosophy of atmospheric places, which would answer a question that I have in mind since several months, which is, are atmospheres site-specific? Like, are they replicable? Do they exist in a specific, are they engineered? Can they be transferred like a monument? So are so material and let's say, do they have a duration according to which we can transfer them and then they can have the same effect? Or when we transfer them, they have in the new place or in the new site, they change function, they enter into new series of meanings. But this is a more general problem. For instance, Elisa Caldarola has written a beautiful introduction to La filosofia dell'arte contemporanea, philosophy of contemporary architecture, in which this question on site specificity is very important. So, of course, the question of place has all the question of stories that we tell around a specific space. Yeah, and you're right. That's missing from the debate, and some gains of the social sciences can be transferred in philosophy. Thank you. Yeah.
So we have a question from Gianluca and some questions sent by on the chat.
Yeah, but it's gonna be very brief. Can you hear me there? Yeah, probably. So I mean, it was a beautiful presentation, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you were mentioning cinema, you were mentioning things regarding the cinematic technique before when you were talking with Professor Sado, but I never heard the word image or images in your presentation, which for me is like kind of elephant in the room when you discuss questions regarding places, spaces, and at this point, likely atmospheres too. So, so my question was, did you do this on purpose? And you answered that yes. So I want you to elaborate on this. So why you didn't include images? So, and by images, I'm referring to this sort of gray zone in which you can include pretty much visual arts. So you were saying before that cinema is not probably a proper art or a proper strategy to look at when you want to delve into the question of atmospheres, simply because there is like technology at work in cinema, and then you have like a mediation that impedes this kind of reasoning, right? But I want to contest this a little bit, because you have mediations pretty much in every single kind of strategy, even in studying atmospheres as you do, and as other scholars are doing here. You work through categories, and conceptual categories are mediations in themselves. So I want you to elaborate on images and why you didn't want to have a specific take on that. And so, but the question is open to, since I'm not expert in atmospheres, it's also open to the other people here listening. Because as someone that comes from outside, to me it seems pretty clear that there must be some need to include a view or an angle in which images can be discussed as conceptual instruments.
Yeah, this is a very good question. So, for instance, in analytic philosophy, there is someone that is studying the atmospheres of pictures and has been the most, let's say, complete account. Even Professor Takuya engages with questions of mental images and atmospheric perception. So I tend to exclude it because of atmospheres in aesthetics, taking Böhme's away, have been conceptualized exactly to criticize the premise of the image. So the attempt was to look for a kind of art that was not visual, but it was rather haptic, olfactory, was like not perceived through the retina, even if, of course, it's more complex than that, right? I mean, images are not just what is perceived through the retina.
It's not about visuals only. Like, you know, that's
Yes.
the gray zone that we were talking about, you know, right?
Yeah.
Because writers, poets, they do write about images, and they do write images, right? But through different senses and via different strategies. So we can really talk about oral images, right? Or like
Yes, and also like
nose, or like
seeing is a fundamental part of sensing the where.
Right.
Like, or what do? Are you like blindfolded when you sense the where? Like, but even in that case, you are experimenting with one sense, right?
That's why, you know, to me, it sounds really not weird, but strange that you have something like an image that can have like a wide array of possibilities.
Yeah.
In practical terms, that can be like really functional if you want to attach the function that an image has to atmospheres.
Right. So the initial inquiry on this is that atmospheres are defined in analogy with phenomena like the fog,
Okay.
or clouds, or the smoke in a crowded bar. So phenomena that actually hinder good conditions of visibility. And by doing this, they enhance perception with other senses, in other sense modalities. This is fictional, no? Like this is a very, this is an abstraction that allows us to experiment, for instance, as Lorenzo does with olfaction, or as René Jagneau, that I have cited before in analytic philosophy, only in picture. And then he's like saying, no, atmospheres is only, I'm focusing on, it's an operational simplification.
We have some comments or questions on the chat.
I'm curious.
Can you read it? Because
No, it's really too far.
Luca, can you read it?
So it's a wonderful presentation. I'm interested in the ontology of the more or other than human. I guess this might be termed post-phenomenological. I wonder if you had thoughts on how atmosphere might lend itself to this, please.
But then it continues.
I continue. Sorry. Okay. So it's from. Sorry.
Should I come?
So I have an hermeneutic.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the same person. So I have an hermeneutical methodology called auditioning, thinking, articulating being through aesthetic tropes associated with sound. But that's nice.
Figo, infatti.
Touch, reciprocity, And this goes with my other idea of ambient metaphysics, ways of thinking the in-between, the dialectic node between binary terms like subject, object, phenomenon, nomenon, absence, presence. I think this sonic vocabulary is more conducive to an ontological equilibrium between things than the more hierarchical visual anthropocentric lexicon of classic phenomenology.
This is a great idea, and I'm really curious to know your work more, like to read something, because I mean, ontology of atmospheres has not been done, especially toward the non-human. There is a lot of, you know, intersubjectivity, interpersonality, intercorporeality. But if we had really to go out of the box and think, for instance, in terms of sonic experience and a metaphysics of ambience, I like this a lot. Perhaps it must be different than the metaphysics that has been done so far over the last century. So I'm really curious, and you know, I wrote this down. I don't have precise answers because it's not something that I've explored.
Angelica,
We have the reference in the chat. Probably I can write it down later.
chat about there is another comment by Christopher Asherwood.
Okay, so my interest is in literature. How might the idea of atmosphere as an immersive and affective force help us rethink how we navigate and interpret narrative space, not as a fixed structure, but as a something fluid, participatory, and emergent? For example, I could use weather-related terms to create a specific atmosphere. These are images as well, right? In the reader. Also, in Japanese, we use the expression to read the air, kuki or yomu, which means to understand that which is not obvious. I wonder how this compares with your definitions. Is it concluded?
Yes.
Sure.
I'm really interested in this definition of reading the air, and I've been asking this question to multiple people about what does it mean. You know, I wanna dig deeper. In narratology, I mean, there are people that have been studying this, but it's not my field of research. Actually, there was another postdoc in the project, the ATMOS-Project in Turin, Carmen Bonasera, who was supposed to develop this project, and she started, and she's very knowledgeable about this, but then she quitted for better endeavors. So I would suggest maybe to ask her, because I'm really not familiar about atmospheres in narration. Like it's not a medium with which I'm working at the moment. I've focused more on architecture, installations, landscapes, and I can't do everything. Carmen Bonasera, she's the expert.
If someone on Zoom want to make a comment or put some questions.
Yeah.
This is
On reading the air. Can you hear me?
yes.
So I mean, has been analyzed that there's a whole book starting from the expression, and like as I approach that, because like for us it would be more. So as we imagine, no, it seems to be this kind of like East Asian sensitivity with this like effort for attunement. But actually, the idea is that it's a kind of conformity. It's very much connected to the authoritative element of atmospheres. That's something that in Europe has been, I think, mostly explored by Andreas Mihalopoulos in London. So when he's like connecting atmospheres and lowscapes, like he's very much stressing these possibility of atmosphere of producing a sense of conformity that doesn't rely on explicit orders, but rather like just to like having this feeling that in this space things are done in this way. And like Kukyo Yomu is very much rather than being related to like aesthetic sensations or a connection to the environment, is very much about like how to behave and how to fuse oneself, how not to make attrition in a human environment, which I think it's not a very relevant element of like how atmospheres are like actually influencing our behavior. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't think the Japanese bibliography on this theme is translated, or maybe Alberto knows more about it. But like, I think in a way, like completely unknown, completely unbeknownst, Michalopoulos like got very close with the idea of like atmosphere as a low scale, as a law that doesn't need to be written to be effective, and on the contrary, is like more effective because it stays unwritten and has like a huge capability of influencing, like informally influencing behavior. That's the more or less what my understanding of the Japanese expression "reading the air" is, like way less poetic than I thought at first.
And so maybe there is a request for you.
So can write the name of the scholar, please.
Chat.
The chat. I have a request for Jamie. Since like if can you write your name, like including the surname, so that I can trace your work? Otherwise, we will need to do some investigation. We're gonna write sonic metaphysics and see what happens.
For Jamie, can you hear us? Oh, okay. No?
No, this
Yes.
was Lorenzo.
Yeah,
Maybe we could.
I'm trying to, so the Andreas Philippos Mihopoulos is working on landscapes and atmospheres, and then I couldn't remember from the top of my head, but like this like quite famous book about like reading air is by Yamamoto Shichihei. I think it's old. This is like early 2000s. No, sorry, it's much older. It's from the 80s, from the like 77. Sorry. Really how atmospheres are a very powerful mean for conformity, which like their political and social implication also has these like less savory element. It's very easy to forget if we focus on the atmospheric and the aesthetic value. So it seems to we actually
Don't have any reaction from Jamie.
Yeah,
I can search in my
I wrote.
email address.
Okay.
Probably can find it.
Yes.
So if there are no other questions, maybe we can close our talk, today's talk now. So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for your attention, for your interest. Thank you, and comments.